Hi, I'm Jennifer from Shabby Fabrics. Fall is one of my favorite times of the year. I just love the beautiful colors of the foliage and the crisp mornings, and I just love sewing with those colors. We designed a cute little wall hanging and accented it with some really cool prairie points using a tool I found at Quilt Market called the Prairie Pointer. Now this is available as a kit, but what I want to show you today is how the Prairie Pointer works, and I've used it for other projects too, so this is a great investment. I've used it now on 3 different projects, but let me show you how to make these really neat prairie points. They just add such a fun little accent to any project. So we've got 2 styles, one that is accented with the stitches from your sewing machine, and the other one is a lined prairie point. So let me show you how this works. When you get your Prairie Pointer, you'll hear it's a metal triangle, and it's got some measurements, of course, etched in it, and also some horizontal lines and a vertical line. And inside the little pamphlet that comes with the Prairie Pointer, there is a chart for helping you know, depending on how big you want your prairie points to be, what size you're going to be cutting your fabrics, of course. And the same is true for the lined prairie points. Now, I wanted to point out that these charts, like right here, for example, there's one that's 1.5 inches, and the next line says 2 inches. You can just average that and get a 1 3/4 inch and average all the way across. So this is not restrictive. You can definitely do anything in between and beyond by following the same trend that she's created here in this little pamphlet. I wanted to start off with the single fabric, but that you add stitching, which is so fun because really with my sewing machine, it has all these great stitches and I've really never used them. I just primarily am a quilter and a crafter, so I'm always using a straight stitch and maybe a zigzag, but with the stitches that come with today's machine, you can just go for it and add really fun threads, and of course, there's so much out on the market. You can just have a lot of fun making these prairie points that have beautiful stitching on it. So the first thing that you're going to do is go ahead and go to your chart that is inside your Prairie Pointer and decide how big you want the prairie point finish height to be. So in this particular case, we wanted, let's see, we cut this piece to be 3.5 inches. So that will give us a finished prairie point of 1.5 inches. So we just cut a reasonable length. You know, you're going to cut that as long as you want, and then if you need more prairie points, just cut another piece of fabric. So on this particular case, our little orange prairie points finished at 1.5. So we've cut this to 3.5 inches. The first thing that you'll do is take that to the pressing mat, and you're just going to fold that exactly in half with the wrong sides together. Now I've put black thread of the Masterpiece, that's the 100% cotton thread from Superior, in my sewing machine because I really want the stitching to show, which is, you know, normally we don't want the stitching to show, but in this type of project we do, so and that's fun. So I'm just going to pick like a zigzag. Now you've got the raw edge and you've got the edge that has the fold. You'll be putting the stitching by the edge that has the fold. So let me just throw that in there, and so you can see how fun it is to be doing these decorative prairie points. Look how fun that is. Isn't that so neat? And of course, your machine probably has many more stitches than mine does. This is a pretty basic machine. So you could just experiment on some scrap fabric and have a great time. Now, if you cut your strips to 3.5 inches wide, you're going to cut your segments into 3.5 as well, because prairie points are always starting from squares. So we'll just go with our little small ruler, our little Omni Grip, that it's so handy. I use it for almost everything. And then I think we'll only get 2 out of that segment. Okay, so now this is where the Prairie Pointer comes in. So we'll bring this to our pressing mat. So I'm going to go ahead And you can see how the kind of the delta of the pointer, I'm going to put that so that the edge is here and the edge is here. And notice how those go to the 3.5 mark. So now I know I'm lined up left to right. All I have to do is fold that down, and I'm going to press. Some people have found, and I remember now that I'm in the middle of showing you this, I think Susan recommended that if you pre-size your fabric and it's a little more stiff, that when you go to this step, it's even easier because the fabric already has sizing in it. Now, it's not too late to add that at this point, but I always like to size fabrics typically up front and not really after the fact. But that's a pointer too, that you could add some sizing. It gives it just a little more body, a little more stiffness. Now, look how cute this is. Now, I can pull this away because I've got a good crease going now. And we'll just let that heat up. And then you just repeat the process. So that's how you make a prairie point with decorative stitch using just one fabric. Now I'm going to show you how to make the lined prairie point. Okay, look how cute this is. Just look how adorable that is with that little stitching. And you can just imagine all the different stitches that you have in your sewing machine, so you can experiment and have fun. Now on the lined prairie point, that's on the right side of your chart here. And same story. You're going to decide what how high you want that prairie point to be. If you want that to be 1.5, you'd cut your lining to 2 1/4. You'd cut your main fabric to 1 3/4. Now, the fabric that's on the outside is considered the main fabric. And of course, the fabric that has the accent, which in this case is the gold, would be the lining. So we actually wanted ours to hang a little bit lower than the orange. So we split the gap on this chart and we wanted our prairie point to be 1 3/4 inches high. So all we did was average those numbers. We ended up cutting the lining to 2.5 and our main fabric to 2 inches. So the first thing that you'll do is place the fabrics right sides together, and you'll just sew a typical 1/4 inch. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to press the fabric toward the main, which is the black in this case. Whatever's on the outside, the bulk of the prairie point is the main fabric. Once you get your 1/4 inch seam, I want you to press your fabric toward the main, and when we come back, we'll get going on those lined prairie points. Now that I have the two pieces sewn together and we're pressed toward the main fabric, which in this case is the dark, we'll go ahead and go to the pressing mat again, and with wrong sides together, we'll press. Okay. That to be good and flat. I can see the sizing is probably a really good idea because you want prairie points to be good and stiff, so having just a little bit more body in there is a great idea. And going back to this, you know, we again did the 1 3/4, which was actually between the second and third line in here. So we're going to average those numbers, and we're going to cut into 4-inch segments. So your chart is going to help you know what to do. So don't worry, you will know exactly what you need to do by referring to the chart. So I'm going to cut in 4-inch segments. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we'll put that aside for now. Now, just as before, you will take this Prairie Pointer, and we're going to go ahead. See how it's coming down to the 4? Now, I'm going to drop just a little bit lower than that. Just a breath under, because I notice when I'm up at the 4 and I bring my prairie point down, I have a gap right there. Well, I like it to be fully closed, so I might drop down just a little bit. Maybe even we'll add some starch this time. Maybe that'll give us just a little bit more body. So now we're going to bring those sides in, and we're going to press. All right, and we'll bring the other side in, and we'll press again. Now you can leave the Prairie Pointer in there. I saw Susan Cleveland, who is the inventor of the Prairie Pointer, and what a fun lady she is. Dynamic, energetic. You can either leave it in there, it doesn't hurt it, or you can pull it out. If you leave it in there, it's going to get hot. It's metal, so of course metal conducts heat. But I like to leave it in there until I know it's definitely taken on the shape, and then I can just back it out and it'll cool off by the time you get this all pressed. So that's all there is to making decorative Prairie Points with decorative stitching and one fabric, and also the lined. And of course, then to just put them onto your project, you can stagger those however you want to stagger those, and you'll just line those up along the edge of the quilt or the bottom of the project like this, stitch them into place, and you're on your way. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to make very fancy and fun Prairie Points.